Hey there, you're watching Bare Knuckle Binder. Welcome to the channel. I'm back on the R-170 4x4. It is a 1954 International Harvester R-170 Coleman 4x4 conversion. It was at one time a wrecker when I bought it a year and 1 day ago. Now I know there's a lot of folks who want the wrecker bed to stay because I can admit the wrecker bed looks really cool, but got this this rear frame, all these busted leaf springs. This thing is uglier than a bar of homemade soap. And this thing is locked up tighter than a gnat's. It's locked up tight. The wrecker bed itself is not any better. This thing is worn out and I'm gonna convert it into a much more usable rig. I just wanna touch on that real quick is that with rigs this size, this is not a 3/4 ton truck. This is a 3-ton truck. This is at least 3 times bigger than what most people would choose to collect and restore. I know that when the guy was selling this truck before I got to him, he said that most of the people just wanted to buy the sheet metal from him and then scrap the rest of it. This old guy had used this truck to make a living or part of his business for a long time, and I told him what my plans were with it, and he said that he wanted me to have it. That's kind of how this all came about. I think I've mentioned it before, and I made a video about this motor, but this truck, when I got it, it had a thrown rod. It had aerated not only the block, but also opened a window in the oil pan. A lot of that stuff was not usable. Most of the motor was junk because of it. I sent off the rockers to a guy in Colorado who could use them. But so there's a 282 in this thing. It came with a 282. That is a BD 282 out of an A170 that I found at an estate sale up by Dallas. And then my buddy Tim ended up going and buying that truck for the frame for his beefed up B120 4x4 Travelette. Super cool truck. And that parts truck is definitely one that every part of it has been used. There's parts of it that I think are in my Coleman, my 3/4 ton. I think I've used some parts for it, but especially the motor is in this one. And it had the 5-speed overdrive Fuller transmission, which is now in this one. This one originally had the direct drive 5-speed, and it's got 7/16 diffs. We'll get into that soon. I'll get into the motor and everything I'm dealing with on that later. This point, I just want to focus on the frame and doing some chopping on this thing because it's taken too long. And the last video, I know sometimes I get carried away talking, just trying to explain everything I'm doing and why I'm doing stuff. And a lot of times I'm explaining why stuff is really cool to an international harvester nerd like myself. However, the last video I made about this truck, I felt like I said the same thing 3 times over. So let's just get into chopping this thing and we're gonna talk about it later. I'm gonna talk to you through this a little bit while I'm doing it. So this thing has a hitch on it that I've shined up, and I have this tow bar that the last time I moved this truck, the truck kind of got away from us a little bit and it bent up the tow bar pretty good, put a good sized bend in it. So I cut that off and I shine up the ends of this, and I'm just going to turn this into a rear axle dolly. I'm cutting this thing off in 2 pieces right ahead of the rear axle so that the rear axle does not have a lot of tongue weight for the dolly that I'm fabbing up, and it's easier to move around until the point that I'm gonna pull the axle off of it. And then I'll be cutting it about 6 to 8 inches behind the cross member that's about 2 feet behind the transfer case there. And then we'll start stacking up frame and building it out from there. All right, so I spent some time and I cleaned up this point there where the last cut was. I made this leveling bar here with trailer jacks on each end. It's been really handy getting the truck kind of sitting level, and it was jacked up quite a bit. But anyway, look at that. I've got the first section of frame to weld onto here. With this section of frame here, I've been cleaning up here, getting ready to to blend it into this, weld it up over here. Now I've got some welds you can see there that were on the truck already, so I'm notching here to compensate for those so I can get these nice and close. I still have to do it on this side. And then using the motor hoist there to lift up the back and get this thing in here. I found that even though the frame is pretty cobbled up looking, the welds are great and the guy's measurements were pretty much dead square. So that's been really handy for doing this because I've got to measure off of those corners of here onto this cross member here to make sure this thing is all squared up. Even though that looks kind of beaver toothed right now, I took the time to measure this whole thing out and square it all up. So I know I'm good. So I just got to get this thing just all in here. The problem is on this lower frame here, just the bottom part, it's trying to flare out a little bit and stuff. That's why I've welded there. I had to take those bolts out anyway to get this thing to sit right down flush on it. I'm just gonna get this thing on here. I'm gonna start gluing it together. All right, got carried away again and glued the thing on there and then mocked up the back, or mocked up the lower back, I should say. Got this thing in here to dry out overnight. It's pretty wet from being out in the rain. It's kind of been cruddy all day today. Been a good day to be in the shop working on welding stuff. Anyway, it's lining up actually perfect. The only thing I need to do about it, as far as all the measuring is concerned, is that right here at these rivets, right ahead of it, right about here is 130-inch wheelbase. This would be the center of the axle. And this is exactly between the spring hangers. Now on a 140-160 series 4x4 International from the factory of this era, the reason I keep bringing up the 130-inch wheelbase is because that's the magic number for a 140 series 4x4 coming from the factory that had a 9-foot pickup bed on it. And this has a 9-foot pickup bed going on, but this is not a 140 or 160 series truck. I will say the number works on a 160 series truck as well, since I have my 56 S160. I put a 9-foot bed on it. It's got a 130-inch wheelbase just by chance because that's what the CDF had it ordered as. We can get into that later. If there's questions about it, drop me a comment. But what I'm running into on this particular frame is that there's some similarities, but there's also a concern. And the similarity is that when International made the 140, 160 series trucks, they beefed them up. They wanted to make sure that they were really stout. So what they did was, instead of making a frame somewhere in between the 130 and 150 series trucks, they took the larger 150 series frames for the 140 and then made that a 4-wheel drive. Same with the 160 series. There is a 160 series truck, straight truck. Obviously, these frame pieces are from one, but what they did is they took a 170 series frame and they put the 4x4 stuff onto that. Now, it's slightly different in this case though, because the 170 frame in the front, really the front is where it matters. The back is just straight frame. But in the front, it matters because the motor mounts are slightly different and the axle is not the corporate IH axle, the Eaton designed FA50. It's a Coleman axle. So I don't know exactly how that lines up in comparison. It might be exactly the same. It looks like if I was just to bolt a 9-foot bed to this thing, it would line up dead on the money. But I also want to give myself a little bit of leeway in case A, my measurements are off. It's happened before. B, I run into some clearance issues with the hoist because this 9-foot bed has a hoist. I'll tell you one more reason, C, why that would be helpful is because if you've seen my 56 S160 4x4 with a 9-foot pickup bed, that truck has 1120 tires. And the way it lines up in the fender well, the wheel looks about as far forward as you would want. I mean, you'd almost want it back like an inch or two. And a lot of folks who are unfamiliar with this series of International trucks even think it looks out of proportion. I know that this truck, when I get it all together, is never going to have any tires smaller than a 920. So if I can avoid that a little bit, like, just cheat it back about an inch, there's no real playbook about how to make this exact truck because I'm just, you know, building it from basically scratch at this point. I'm shooting for a wheelbase of 131 if I can get away with it. Just because of how this rear section came out cut, I really don't have that much room in the front. If I had like 4 extra inches, I could be like, okay, well, I could have like 133, but I think 131 is possibly the most I can squeeze out of this. We're gonna see. This is where the two frames meet right now. That mark is where my center of leaf spring is. If I can get it lined up on this side of the rivets, I'd be happy with it. So I've got this piece of 1/2 inch, and I was thinking about mating it up there. It serves two purposes because one, it'll give me a little bit of space, but also these two don't match up. This is a smaller frame. This is actually original R-170 frame, and this is original R-160 frame. So they're a little bit different. So I want to match those up. I want something to weld both of those to for extra support. And this thing happens to be, the shortest point is 9 inches, which is what this frame is, and then it's 6 inches across. So these frames are 3 inches deep, so that's gonna be perfect. So we should be good. So I'll show you one more thing before I go in for the night and come out here tomorrow and we glue this thing together. Ooh, nice fire going. It's nice. Okay, this is the old, the shop's a mess, I'm cleaning it up. I don't live up here, so, you know. Anyway, this is the floor from the truck. Isn't that nasty? That's the floor I was talking about, how the cab, I was like, this cab is toast, I gotta find a new cab. Well, I just found a new floor and I'm in the process of bolting her in. It's looking really good. So, once we get the frame all together and the wheels on it, I can roll it outside and get the tractor down here and put the cab back on it. Good stuff. Okay, a little quick look on what we're up against today. I'm getting everything lined up for the lower section to get welded on, and I have to cut this guy here. Let me get these gloves out of the way. I've got to cut this guy here. This top part of the double frame has to come off. I've got to grind off these rivets here and these rivets here. I'll probably put a bead of weld right in there just to hold that in place. I'll show you how I did it on the other side. Now I haven't got the bead of weld in here just to hold this in place. I was also thinking about maybe knocking these down a millimeter or two with a hammer and then plug welding those rivets. Just a little extra just to hold it in place. I might take a die grinder and just put a little divot in there so I can bead some weld in there and then grind it flat. This is with the double frame removed on top. So this section of frame, I actually had to grind off some rivet heads there. So now this lower frame here on this side, when I raise it up, it connects completely along this side. So it's flat and life is wonderful. Another thing, I started getting these all sorted out. Yeah, guess what? They're heavy. Oh. So this covers us here, butts up, and then it'll be there. And like I said, they're not exactly the same size, so it will help to strengthen up that union and get a full weld on both sides. One thing I have found, I went through and I measured the wheelbase on both sides, just making sure I have this completely even, and it is lining up pretty good. With the wheelbase, it looks like, I'm gonna put a little mark here because I'm all about efficiency, but it looks like, well, it's hard to see now because this thing is lowered, but the way it's looking is like I'm get about a 130 3/4 wheelbase. So on the one hand, that 130, within the 130 within an inch of there is completely ideal. On the other hand, I'd like to have an inch or two, but we'll call 130.75 not too shabby. I think I can live with that. All right. There's the line. It's pretty good. Lined it right up. There's that 1/2 inch plate all welded in there. Worked out beautifully. But let's talk about this wheelbase line here. So we got here, meeting up here. Oh, and it's a little beyond that. So it's about 131. So I'm dead on the money. That said, I've got leaf springs on here. I'm a little cross member heavy here. These are about to come out. A little bit of running beads, tightening up some frame stuff. Setting the grill on here. Getting myself excited. And passenger side. So the line goes the line, and then right there. So we're pretty golden. I want to do the bed hoist stuff, but before I do that, I'd like to put that cab on it. No, before I do that, I'd like to actually get the rear axle on just to make her a little more stable. My trailer jack leveling bar slash stand, jack stand, works fantastic, but I don't want to use it any more than I have to. I'd rather have it sitting on an axle. I've actually got to get the dump bed mechanism kind of worked up on here, and it's probably going to push on the chassis, and it works great as long as you're stationary, but I don't want to start rocking back and forth on it. Luckily, hey, brought the 41M up here with the rear section with the axle. So I'm just going to torch those U-bolts out of there. This whole rear section goes to the scrapyard. Nothing on it, as far as I can tell, is usable other than the axle. And I'm going to cut that hitch bar off that I welded on to make it a little more handleable. So anyway, I'm going to get this cut off of here so I can bring the axle in and shut the door, and Bob's your uncle. All right, so it seems like a pretty good place to wrap this up. So let's take a look at what we're dealing with. The axle is on the truck. The truck is sitting on its wheels. I figured it would be sitting on its wheels a few days earlier than this, but such is life. I'm not just up in Wisconsin because of the truck. I laid out a measuring tape. You see it up there. It's a dead-on wheelbase of 131 inches. It might actually be 131 1/8, so I'm pretty elated with that. I mentioned before that I got the grill on here. It's just sitting right now. I'm waiting until I get the radiator put in. The radiator is actually over here. I've been out here sorting bolts. With everything about my family situation at the moment, I'm actually doing my best to clean out years, decades of my stored stuff in the shop. But anyway, here's a radiator. I've got to go through the whole thing. I don't think it has any leaks, but I got to go through and clean all the fins, straighten them all out like I did on the 35 a few videos ago. The surround I've PR15'd as long as I was doing it to the cab floor. Excuse me, not PR15. I use KBS. I really like it. I'll be using that from now on. It's, from what I understand, essentially the same thing. Radiator should be going in the next couple days. The frame is pretty much all welded to the point that I can start working on installing the hoist bed. I've got all these fasteners laid out, and these are fasteners that attach fenders and floorboards. Then these are attaching some floorboards. This is some radiator stuff, some cab mount stuff, and this, well, that is the start of some homemade linkage. This didn't have a parking brake when I got it, but this transmission that I put in, the Fuller with the overdrive, had the parking brake band on it. And so I got a lever on there. I'm fabbing up linkage for that. I'm fabbing up linkage for the clutch. And I don't know, I'm really happy with it. It's turned out great. Truck sits level. It's got a little bit of a sag to the passenger side actually, but that's because of leaf springs. And I don't have my leaf spring re-arching jig here, and that's okay because honestly these leaf springs wouldn't fit in it. So I do need to make a larger, wider leaf spring re-arching jig. And I just gotta apologize real quick too, because I know that last week's video was all about the road trip from California, and I'm interrupting the trip by going to the R-170 right now, but I'm up in Wisconsin right now, got some family stuff going on, and just that's how it shook out. Next week's video will either be picking up on the trip or this truck. I'm doing a lot on this truck right now. It's just going to be a matter of which one I have time to edit. If I have a lot of time to edit, which honestly is kind of doubtful, I'll put up 2 videos. So anyway, thanks for watching, y'all. This pretty much wraps up the framework beyond what I'm going to do with the hoist bed. So the next video of this truck should be the hoist bed and hopefully putting the cab and the bed on this thing, which would be, I can't wait to see it. So anyway, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. That really helps me out, and I will see you in the next video.